leading to its doubling out to about US dollar 1.5 trillion by 2030. Here we are talking about safe, healthier and nutritious food for the individuals and their families. However, the supply chain will not be able to keep up with the demand due to the inherent agricultural challenges such as limited agricultural land, stagnant yields, aging labor force in the farming sector, and post-harvest loss and food wastage as a whole. Now, food wastage, for example, globally is around 30%. The good thing is that ASEAN countries are still net exporters of food, and this should not sway them from the supply side challenges. They will have to address the supply side chain challenges. If one looks at the food trade patterns, ASEAN countries are also interdependent in terms of commodities that go into processed food manufacturing, such as cereals, wheat, maize, and even non-food products such as chemicals and oils. As such, ASEAN economies have been and will be affected by global economic shocks, as we have witnessed over the last few decades. Now, the COVID pandemic for the last 2 years tested the supply chain, value chain, and food systems in ASEAN. While ASEAN placed restrictions on the movement of goods and services during this period, it was heartening to see agricultural inputs, farm workers, and services being able to move across the region with lesser restrictions. That helped to protect the livelihoods of workers in the farming sector, in the agriculture and food sector. However, in general, the COVID situation exacerbated labor and input shortages, increased border challenges for the movement of goods and services, and increased panic buying and hoarding during the initial phase of the pandemic. Going forward, with the easing of COVID situation, business would want to see ASEAN making every possible effort to keep their borders open to trade. These should include trade and logistical connectivity and avoiding any new and additional trade barriers. This is to avoid nationalistic sentiments to protect the domestic markets, as imports are essential for ASEAN countries to continue to grow their economic pie and feed their people. Second, the interdependence between ASEAN and the world needs to be recognized, as this could bring unforeseen effects of global events, including what we are witnessing now, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Third, the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises in the food sector, will need financial assistance to continue to cope with the situation as things improve. On the business side, every effort needs to be made to address and mitigate the COVID impact, protecting the well-being of the workers and suppliers, inventory management, production and distribution channels. The food industry has shown agility and resilience during the pandemic. We should continue in the pandemic recovery period. Governments and businesses will need to work together to achieve a solid recovery, as the pandemic has shown that it takes the collaboration between the two and other stakeholders to achieve sustainable recovery. Here's where I see the RCEP coming into the picture. The RCEP came into force on 1st January 2022, and this should be seen as a vehicle to support regional economic recovery and re-establishing the supply and value chain. In addition, it should help to stimulate trade, investment, and economic growth across the region. The unique advantage of RCEP is a streamlining of the requirements around the rules of origin. The added value comes from increasing the utilization of preferential agreements by unifying the rules of origin and expanding accumulation rules. When preferences are fully multilateralized, members can get inputs from the cheapest suppliers globally. This will support the growth of the supply chain and allow RCEP to deliver its most significant benefits for all the members. In short, RCEP will facilitate local sourcing of goods and promote regional value chain collaboration. Besides, the several improvements that I see in RCEP will facilitate the services sector, two-way investment, and e-commerce. It complements, I would say, the CPTPP and should be seen as a platform for the Indo-Pacific economic framework that is being discussed by the participating countries. As for the food sector, the business will continue to face challenges in leveraging the RCEP given its complexity and the sensitive nature of food in trade agreements, even though I would say the RCEP addresses some of these concerns, especially the trade barriers. Nevertheless, I believe the potential of the RCEP for the food sector will be enormous, with the reduction and elimination of tariffs and the lowering of compliance costs for food processed in the region. The good thing is that RCEP requires only one certificate of origin to claim the preferential duty rates in any RCEP country, thereby allowing low trade compliance costs. I mean, there are many details related to the RCEP and the food sector, but I will leave the detailed discussion to the experts, especially on the ROO, SPS, and other issues that are, I would say, very interesting in terms of the RCEP. Let me take this opportunity again to thank the organizers for inviting the business to such a conference, such a webinar, and I wish the participants a successful seminar and outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Nathan, for the brief yet comprehensive sharing on the opportunities and challenges faced by private sectors in the food and beverage industry. Now we will move on to the first key presentation from Ms. Denise Cheska Enrique. Ms. Cheska is a specialist supervising trade and industry development in the Department of Trade and Industry, Philippines. And her presentation will focus on the ROO chapter and its relevant annexes from the agreement. Ms. Cheska, you may have the screen.
Thank you, Annie, for the introduction. I hope I'm coming in clear. Excellencies, distinguished guests and speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all. First, I wish to thank the ASEAN Secretariat and the East Asian Business Council for inviting me to share my views on the RCEP agreement and how it can support the food and beverage industry. I am pleased to join today's discussion on this very important free trade deal established among 15 countries and came into effect at the start of this year. Rules of origin is a key component of any FTA and an area that businesses closely review in order to access an FTA's preferential tariff treatment. First, let me begin by sharing an observation of the president of the PhilExport, the Philippines Umbrella Organization of Exporters, whose mission is to lead the export community and work with the government in the pursuit of sustainable, export-led national growth and development. In one of the department's webinars that promotes the RCEP agreement, he highlighted how the consolidation of the rules of origin of the ASEAN +1 FTAs will make it easier for exporters to comply with the requirements to get preferential tariff treatment. Now, this is because the RCEP ROO chapter significantly streamlines origin criteria and certification procedures as compared to the ASEAN +1 FTAs. And today, I will be sharing key provisions incorporated in this mega free trade deal that will further facilitate trade in the region, with focus on the food and beverage industry. The RCEP ROO chapter is comprised of two sections, one on origin determination or origin criteria, and the operational certification procedures or OCP. Supporting these two annexes, there is one on the very important product-specific rules and another on the minimum information requirements of the proofs of origin. So I understand these are very technical terms, but I would like to highlight that for those interested in using RCEP, it is very important to look into these two annexes. Now the chapter, the annexes, all of these together sets the rules required for any product or good to be considered as obtained or produced in the RCEP region, or what we call as an originating good. This is a very important principle that is key for any product to be able to use the lower tariffs that RCEP provides. Apart from setting the rules on the origin, The ROO chapter and its annexes also sets out the documents and other requirements needed in order to prove such originating status. This is very important because without the proper documentation, even if your good is indeed originating, you would not be able to access the lower tariffs provided in RCEP. Now, all of these elements are typical in any FTA. And for today's discussion, I will be sharing with you the improvements that were made under the RCEP agreement as compared to the ASEAN Plus One FTAs. I know RO is a very technical topic, but to help everyone and to ease you into this chapter, I will first present on the origin criteria, and then second, I will move on to the certification procedures. So first and foremost, the RCEP provides exporters and manufacturers with 3 criteria to prove that their good is originating in an RCEP party, and these are as listed on screen. Wholly obtained or produced in a party, produced exclusively in a party from originating materials, and substantial transformation in a party. Now, I don't expect you would all be able to appreciate the meaning of each criteria, and I would encourage you to approach your respective commerce, trade, or even customs authority if you need further explanations on these. Now, what I would like to highlight really, and the key takeaway under RCEP is that the second rule, or what we typically call PE, it is not present in some of the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, such as the ASEAN-Korea FTA. The addition of this rule is beneficial to users, not because it is just one other option, but really because it is an option that would typically entail less supporting documents that must be submitted should you use this. As an example of the PE rule, we have Philippine canned pineapples. Here we see that all inputs used are originating from RCEP parties. And that is if we assume that the Philippines and Indonesia are already parties. I'm sure both countries are exerting their best efforts to be part of this FTA as soon as possible. So assuming they are already parties, we can see that all of the inputs come from RCEP. If there was no PE rule, the RVC rule would typically be used, and that may require the submission of cost statements because you are talking about regional value content. So that would not be the case in PE, as the company would usually only need to show that the inputs used are originating. So this may only require the submission of the process flow used, and the proof of origin showing that all of these other inputs come from the RCEP region. Further, in relation to the 3 criteria, being in an FTA with 15 parties, there is really a wider area, a wider group of countries from which inputs can be sourced. Now, in the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, there are only 10 or 11 other countries that can be used as a source of raw materials and other inputs. However, in RCEP, this is greatly expanded given the wider membership. As I said earlier, not all signatory states are part of the agreement, and I look forward to the time that everyone is a party so that this wider accumulation area can be fully realized. Moving on, in RCEP, there are also more liberal product-specific rules for about 574 tariff lines as compared to the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, and this covers both agriculture and industrial goods. I'll ask that we move on to the next slide. And here we can see that about 11% of all tariff lines have better or more liberal PSRs. And we have below some examples. But what do we really mean by more liberal PSRs? Moving on to the next slide, we have 6 examples So these are not the only products that have improved PSRs, but just as some examples. First, we have two items, butter and cheese. And we see that in the ASEAN-Korea FTA, in order to use the FTA, these products must be wholly obtained in a party. Now, the WO, or wholly obtained rule, is very restrictive, as countries without domestic production of milk would be unable to meet the rule. So milk is the essential input to create butter and cheese. So under RCEP, this is improved because now you have the option to use RVC 40, which is a regional value content, or change in chapter, which also allows cumulation among RCEP countries. So this means that if you would like to make butter and cheese and export this to Korea, under the RCEP, you have the option of importing milk and other inputs and raw materials from other RCEP countries, instead of having to source all of that in your country. For items 3 and 4, we have preserved mussels and cashew. So looking at the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as well as the ASEAN-Korea FTA, if you were to use, when you look at the source of mussels and cashews used in the production, they have to come from other parties to the ASEAN-Japan or ASEAN-Korea FTA. But looking at RCEP, the rule is actually CC, or change in chapter. What this means is that you can use inputs from outside the RCEP region. So maybe you will import cashews from South America, or you will import mussels from European countries. Now, that is really allowed to take into account the reality that some inputs are seasonal and may not be available in the RCEP region year-round. So that flexibility is something that is accorded under RCEP, but not in some of the +1 FTAs that we have right now. For the last two examples, biscuits and canned pineapples, again, I'm promoting Philippine canned pineapples. The example is essentially the same as for preserved mussels and cashews. Under RCEP, you are allowed to source inputs from outside the region. What you really have to focus on is for the processing that you will undergo, it has to go beyond minimal operations. And minimal operations would include packaging, washing, and other simple processes. So if you were to import products from outside RCEP and you would only do simple processing, I don't expect you will be able to meet the product-specific rule or hurdle this minimal operations requirement. Improvements in these rules is only one aspect of RO, and in my next slides, I will be highlighting how it is easier for businesses, including micro, small, and medium enterprises, to use the agreement. So first, to know the product-specific rule applied to your good, you will have to look at the Annex 3A, as we call it, of the RCEP agreement. This has been drafted in a manner that includes all tariff lines, making it easier for users to understand. So previously, in some of the ASEAN +1 FTAs and even in ATIGA, the annex would not include all tariff lines because a separate rule, which we call the general rule, would apply. So sometimes it causes confusion. So now a full listing has been provided. Now, if your company does not know what HS code your product falls under, you can apply for an advanced ruling on tariff classification with a respective authority in your export destination country. And this will really help you confirm the tariff code of your product, and you can then check what is the product-specific rule and tariff that applies to your good. Now, a word of caution. The agreement was negotiated a few years back, so the tariff nomenclature that is used in the document, such as Annex 3A, is actually still HS 2012. Currently, the RCEP parties are working to update these documents to reflect the HS code, and we hope that that process can be completed soon and uploaded online for easy access of users. Now, there are actually a number of other trade facilitating measures adopted on origin criteria. I won't go through them in depth, but really just to highlight some of the key changes that we have adopted. First, RCEP has two options with respect to regional value content computation, with the exporter or the company being allowed to choose between the two computation processes. We usually have build up or the direct and build down or indirect method. Now, this option to choose is actually not possible in some of the ASEAN Plus One FTAs. Further to this, the agreement also has a very clear explanation on how the regional value content computation will be made. So this makes it easier for users, both the companies as well as the implementing agencies, to understand how this should actually be implemented. Now, there is also a provision explaining how packaging materials will be taken into account depending on the origin criteria you use. The agreement also has a list of non-origin conferring processes and more trade facilitative consignment requirements. And all of these, of course, take into account the requests for more facilitative rules and the concerns of implementing agencies on circumvention. So moving on, we now go to the certification procedures. And in RCEP, there are a number of measures adopted that support the use of the agreement by our businesses. First and foremost, the agreement allows the use of a declaration of origin. Now, this is a very big change. If you are a user of the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, you will know that you are only allowed to use a certificate of origin. In some cases, it must be a manual form, not even an electronic form. So this was a very strong request of the private sector, allowing self-declaration, and is actually considered a game changer in facilitating the use of the FTA. A second big change is allowing electronic formats of proof of origin for specifically certificates of origin and even the other types of proof of origin. Now, why is this important? Sure, it is a request of this private sector, but what does this really mean? So item 2 and 4, as flashed on screen, is the improvement in RCEP. Allowing origin declaration gives businesses more flexibility as they are able to prepare and issue the required certification to avail of the RCEP preferential tariffs. And this is something they can do at their own pace and at their own time. Moreover, these avoid the repeated application for a certificate of origin with a competent authority. So in most cases, if you are already using the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, every time you export a good, you must apply for a certificate of origin with your competent authority. And this you do for every single shipment. So imagine having the flexibility to do it yourself. And of course, when you do it yourself, there are no additional costs. So this really results to time and cost savings. This is even made better because there is an option for a company to be an approved exporter that undergoes a registration process. And then there is also another scheme where registration is not required. So why are there these two avenues? Well, I expect that businesses that are not fully familiar with ROO and may require a helping hand would opt for an approved exporter system so that a competent authority is there to guide them through the issuance of an origin declaration. Meanwhile, more mature companies can do this on their own. Now, just an advice to companies, At this time, only a few countries are allowing the scheme where registration is not required, and these are Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. So I expect that once countries have had more opportunity and more time to implement the agreement, once they become more flexible with how things are done, we will get more countries accepting and implementing this scheme. Now, the last type of origin declaration there at the bottom, declaration by an importer, this is actually only available to Japan. But again, the RCEP is a living agreement. It is not set in stone, and there are opportunities to review and improve the rules as we move forward. I expect that proofs of origin specifically will be continuously reviewed and improved to ensure that the process of using the FTA is always accessible to business, including the micro SMEs. So in summary, the RCEP ROO chapter brings significant benefits to both the private sector and implementing authorities in each country. Rules are transparent and facilitative while maintaining an appropriate level of security to discourage and prevent circumvention. I would summarize the benefits into three things. First, RCEP gives one access to 14 other markets, thereby requiring the study of only one agreement to access a big market. Second, the origin criteria is reflective of current business practices and thereby more applicable to more businesses. And lastly, the range of options on proof of origin make the agreement more user-friendly, accessible, again, especially for micro SMEs. Now, before we end, please be reminded that the rules of origin is only one aspect of accessing preferential tariffs. And this is not the only chapter that you should be reviewing. Looking into the next slide, here you have a snapshot of the commitments given to ASEAN member states by the ASEAN FTA partners. So we have Australia, China, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. Now, when we compare it to the ASEAN Plus One FTAs, we see that the end rates of most products in the F&B industry will actually be brought down to zero. However, since this is just the first year of RCEP implementation, it may be the case that under RCEP, your good is not yet duty-free. So I would strongly recommend those who want to use RCEP to first check what RCEP preferential tariff is available to your product. Then check the rules of origin to see if you can pass the rule of origin. Then, of course, you work with your competent authorities on the issuance of your proof of origin. Now, this brings my presentation to a close. If you would like to check the preferential tariffs, those can be found in the same link as flashed on screen. Again, thank you very much for inviting me today, and I look forward to the Q&A session later. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jessica. Again, to remind all the participants, if you have any questions or comments, you may drop your questions in the Zoom chat box or the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you're joining from YouTube, you may drop your questions in the live chat section on your right-hand side. Now we are moving on to the second presentation. We are inviting Ms. Sri Kusumawardhani, Senior Officer of the Food, Agriculture and Forestry Division of the ASEAN Secretariat. Ms. Dani will be presenting on the SPS chapter under the agreement. And Mbak Dani, you may have the screen.
Thank you, Annie, and good afternoon, Excellency, participants, and speakers. And thank you for the East Asia Business Council for organizing this important webinar in our collaboration with us, the ASEAN Secretariat. Under this section, I would like to introduce the SPS chapter under the RCEP Agreement. The next, please. Next slide, please. As we understand that the RCEP negotiation has began in 2012 and signed in November 2020 by 15 signatories. And this RCEP agreement comprises of 20 chapters, where the sanitary and next slide, Annie. And the SPS chapter as part of the Annex Chapter 5. Under this SPS chapter, we have 17 articles, and some of them are core articles. The core article include the equivalency, adaptation to regional condition, risk analysis, audit, certification, import check, emergency measure, and transparency. And similar to the other SPS chapter under the ASEAN +1 FTA, like the ASEAN-China FTA, ASEAN-Australia and New Zealand FTA, this RCEP SPS chapter provides a basic framework to develop, adopt, and apply SPS measure to protect human, animal, or plant life or health while facilitating trade by minimizing the negative effect of SPS measure on trade. It applies to all SPS measures of the parties which may directly or indirectly affect trade among the parties. And the SPS chapter also affirms right and obligation under the WTO SPS agreement. Next slide, please. This RCEP SPS chapter relies significantly on established WTO law and practice, as well as the work of the WTO SPS committee. It contains provisions that go beyond the existing ASEAN +1 FTA. And compared to the ASEAN +1 FTA, the level of commitment of the RCEP SPS chapter is higher, with additional core articles that are not covered in the earlier trade agreement, and also the inclusion of the WTO plus element in certain articles. These core articles that are not covered under the ASEAN +1 FTA include the element on the audit, certification, import check, emergency measures. These core provisions are agreed to enhance the implementation of the WTO SPS agreement, taking into account relevant international standards, guidelines, and recommendations, and make this requirement legally binding. The WTO plus elements contained in the RCEP SPS chapters can be found in the article equivalency, adaptation to regional condition, risk analysis, and transparency. And this WTO plus element include the use of the online WTO SPS measure for notification. That actually in the WTO, the use of the online notification system is not a mandatory, but we put it under the RCEP agreement. And also to notify to other party on the proposed measure or change to the SPS measure that may have a significant effect on trade. And this is include the conform and do not conform measure to ISGR. In the WTO itself, is only a request to notify measure that do not conform to the ISGR. This WTO+ element also include detailed process to apply the core SPS articles, including to put the timelines in the process. And this is can be found in the article equivalency, adaptation to regional condition, risk analysis, audit, transparency, import check, emergency measures. So all these article have a detailed process that have to be followed by the parties, RCEP parties, and also to abide on the timeline that has been agreed. The next, please. I would like to highlight on the some key articles that is maybe important for the parties. This include the equivalency. Under this article, the parties agree to strengthen the cooperation on the equivalency. And this is, we have to follow or to adopt the SPS agreement and taking into account the relevant decision of the WTO SPS committee and also the international standard guidelines and recommendation. Recognition of the equivalency of the SPS measure also emphasized, and this is to achieve the exporting party measure, whether it achieves the same level of protection as the importing party measure or has the same effect in achieving the objective as the importing party measures. So I think this equivalency is very important in our trading. And the next step, the next slide, please. Sorry. On the adaptation to regional condition, under this article, parties recognize the concept of regional condition, and this include the pest or disease-free areas and areas of low pest or disease prevalency. I think this is also very important, especially if there's an outbreak in the exporting country. So we only can consider or prohibited a product from a certain area. And in conducting or recognizing this adaptation to regional condition, we also have to take into account the decision of the WTO SPS committee and also the ISGR. Cooperation on the recognition of this regional condition also emphasized with the objective of acquiring confidence in the procedures followed by each party for such recognition. And in conducting this process for making a determination, there are some role of the exporting party and also importing party. That exporting party have to provide sufficient information and also access to importing party to conduct inspection, testing, and other relevant procedures, while the importing party have to inform the status of its assessment and provide decision as well as implement it, and also to provide rationale if the assessment does not result in a decision to recognize the regional condition. The next slide, please. Risk analysis. Risk analysis also a part of the important trade process. And under this article, the parties agree to strengthen the cooperation on the risk analysis. And in conducting the risk analysis, it is agreed that the importing parties shall document all the outcome, and also that in considering the risk management option, it should not be more than restrictive than required to achieve its appropriate level of SPS protection, and also to select a risk management option that is not more than restrictive, that required to achieve its appropriate level of SPS protection. The next. In audit, in conducting the audit, the parties also again to take into account the relevant decision of the WTO SPS committee and ISGR. And we also allow that halal requirement that the parties, I mean, this article will not prevent parties to adopt the halal requirements and accordance to the Islamic law. And this audit should be system-based and to assess the effectiveness of the regulatory control of the competent authorities of the exporting party to meet the SPS measure of the importing parties. A detailed process also covered under this article. For the next slide, please. On the certification, under this certificate, we highlighted that on the use of the English documents, as we understand that there are some constraints to understand the non-English document, including the certificate. So under this article, we emphasize on the use of the document, including certificate in English. And also for the importing party to accept the certificate issued by the competent authorities of the exporting party that are in compliance with the regulatory requirement of the importing parties. Detailed process to conduct this certification are also provided in this article, including the timelines and the role of exporting party and importing party in the process. The next slide, please. On the import check. This import check is conducted in accordance with the importing parties law and regulation, and the SPS requirements shall be based on the sanitary and phytosanitary risks associated with the importation. When we found the non-compliance from an import checks, it is an obligation for the importing countries to notify importers or its representative or its exporting country. And if there is a significant or recurring NC, the discussion on this non-compliance should also be done by the parties involved for the appropriate remedial action. Next, please. Emergency measure. This is one of the articles that are not covered in other ASEAN+1 FTA. And this emergency for the protection, this emergency measure is taken for the protection of human, animal health, or plant life, or health, and that may have an effect to trade. And the parties who undertake this emergency measure should notify the relevant exporting parties in writing through their contact point or through the established communication channel. The exporting parties may request discussion with the party adopting the emergency measures. And the discussion should be had as soon as possible, and the information to be provided by the relevant parties. And the party adopts the emergency measure also shall review the measure within a reasonable period of time or on request of the exporting party. If the emergency measure is still need to be maintained when after the review conducted by this importing and exporting parties, this measure should be also reviewed periodically by the importing parties based on the recent information. The next, please. Yes, on the transparency, I think this is a very important as well, a component that is also covered in another FTA+1 agreement. This is to recognize the the parties recognize the importance of this transparency as set out in the Annex B of the SPS agreement. And under this RCEP, the party also recognizing that this the importance of this transparency to exchange of information on the development, adoption, and application of SPS measures that may have significant effect on trade among the parties. That is what we informed earlier, that there is a WTO+ element under this provision, that it was agreed that the SPS measure is include the one that conform and is not conform with the ISGR. And the articles also require each party to notify proposed measure or change to SPS measure that may have a significant effect on the trade of other parties through the online WTO sanitary and phytosanitary measure notification submission system, or through the contact point designated, and also through the already established communication channel of the parties, that usually from the embassy channel. The next. Yes, on the dispute settlement, that the chapter 19 on the dispute settlement of this agreement will not apply to this SPS chapter at the entry into force of this agreement, but this non-application of the chapter 19 will be reviewed 2 years after the date of entry into force of this agreement. I think that is the some highlight that I would like to introduce on the RCEP SPS chapter. But I believe that its application is more than important, and I believe we have Dr. Arifin Tasrif here for the next presentation. He is the former chair of the RCEP SPS working group that will provide and elaborate on how this RCEP SPS chapter can benefit the industry. I think, thank you. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you, Mbak Dani, and thank you for introducing our next speaker. And continuing from that, we are now about to hear more on the implication of SPS chapter and the SPS issues to businesses in F&B. Mr. Arifin Tasrif, as the former chair and negotiator of RCEP Subworking Group on SPS, currently also active in Bogor Agricultural Development Polytechnic and Ministry of Agriculture Indonesia. Pak Arifin, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good afternoon to everyone. Excellency, speakers, participants, allow me to add the previous speakers, and allow me also to share. Okay. Let me just to add the previous speaker are very good already. They elaborate comprehensively dealing with the RCEP SPS chapters. And also from my presentation, perhaps there could be a benefit to speaker on participants in this. Oh, sorry. Okay. Outline presentation that be divided into 5 parts. Firstly, is why food and beverage, and some key provision of RCEP SPS, and also SPS issue on food and beverage business impact, and how could some SPS article could be empowering to both the food and beverage industry. And perhaps at the end of my presentation will be some recommendations. If you look at first dealing with the food and beverage sale globally, it seems that in the last 3 years, prediction or estimation of global food sale increased tremendously. Yeah, from 220 up to estimate on 220 and 2023. Yeah, will positively increase. And this will, I agree with the previous speaker that, of course, that food and beverage is a significant contributor to food industry. And also similar to global beverage sales, that their contribution and estimation within at the end of the last 3 years also increased significantly. That's mean that food and beverage really a very prospect industry in the near future, and how to increase within among RCEP members in the area. If you see the incidence of some SPS measure across sectors, we see that food and beverage is affected very much by SPS measure, around 83% compared to other sectors. But this is globally. This data from UNTAC and in 2020. And more specific, that some fruits and some commodity, for instance, vegetables, fruits, meat, and fish, are ranked for the very big, affect by the SPS measures globally. Almost 490,000 measures, to be affected by the the global trade of agri-food, especially fruits, meat, and fish. And if you see the last 5 commodities, meat, fish, preparation, also vegetables, and I think that's more than 30 commodities already. They affect by the SPS measures dealing with the agri-food sectors. This is an example, the agri-food market in the some RCEP members in the last 3 years. Overall, that Australia, New Zealand, also Philippines, South Korea also increased significantly the market, agri-food market. Even the ASEAN number itself. For instance, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam also tend to increase the market share of the food and beverage, even though COVID-19 pandemic still exists. That this means that during the COVID-19 pandemic, food and beverage will increase tremendously in the global market. The point 2, the previous speaker already elaborate in detail, but let me just highlight that in 17, let's say the 17 articles of the RCEP SPS chapters, I noted that around 6 articles can be utilized to boost market access of food and beverage in the regions. I believe that previous speaker already explained very good. For instance, risk analysis, audit, equivalence, regional conditions, certification, import checks. And this can be used to answer all differences, deviation in the border management action in the importing party. And some also article just for compliance and commitment, and this is how to build cooperations and compliance and openness among the RCEP members. How can RCEP SPS challenge faced by the FNB business? For instance, if any issue raised, due to SPS implementations, how that RCEP SPS challenges can be faced. For instance, the issue on establishment mechanism to address barrier of component to RCEP SPS applied by RCEP members, I do believe that Article 5.15 can be utilized whether bilaterally or all the RCEP members between the exporting and importing party. If some issue raised something like that, the Article 15 can be maximized between the both party. Even though harmonization is not adopted in the RCEP SPS, however, since the Article 5.5, which is contact point, which is regional condition and also equivalence, can be maximized. Can be maximized to use this article to respond or to come up with the mutual recognition arrangement between the two parties. And also, if cannot be reached consensus within the two parties, may perhaps that structure chapter may utilize to combine between the two parties to implement the harmonization to reach the mutual recognition arrangement between the two parties. So this is also very good to face the challenge of any issue raised by the SPS chapters. With regard to the simplification or eliminations of all unnecessary elements or duplication of formalities, processes, and procedure or product in the importing party. So strengthen article of technical consultation. Article 14 or 514. Perhaps this can be resolved, can be overcome, this issue in the border management action. Enhancement transparency. Of course, the transparency article can be strengthened, maximized between the two parties, exporting and also importing party. Perhaps that the public-private sector consultation can be also resolved by the implementation of Article 15 or 515, which is the competent contact point and competent authority. So any private sector may consult with their own contact point or competent authority to discuss the issue raised by the importing party. Another one is if the RCEP aspects help business to reduce the trade costs and to overcome trade barrier. Is that possible that that regional communication mechanism provided by food and beverage companies flexibility in sourcing more diverse and quality raw material intermediate by implementing Article 5.14, or just to maximize the contact technical consultation. So any issue raised by the exporting party due to the SPS implementation by the importing party, so the strengthened cooperation on implementation of Article 5.14 or Article 14 through technical consultation. Enhanced trade facilitation provision, such risk analysis, audit to the exporting party might be come up with equivalence recognitions. As I explained before, that even though harmonization is not there, but since RCEP SPS recognized, agreed to have equivalence recognition, so perhaps that mutual recognition arrangement will be there. How the importing party, exporting party sit together to have win-win solution to accommodate, to reach appropriate level of protection of the importing party through implementation, adoption of mutual recognition arrangement between importing party, exporting party, in the sense of a food and beverage. And what is the valuables that the both party, exporting party might propose, might cover with single product? That means the exporting party might propose only one product or a number of products, or may also propose of a wide system base. For instance, if the exporting party may propose industrial of food and beverage in the exporting party to recognized by the importing party in the whole system. So this is how the RCEP SPS accommodate the whole system of industry of beverage in the exporting party. By implementing Article 5.7, which is the risk analysis, also audit system in the exporting party, and also certification. So Article 9.7, 9.8, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9 can be recognized by mutual recognition by importing party to the exporting party. So if we conclude that there is no more inspection in the importing party, it's why that how to strengthen cooperation in such kind of article between the importing party and the exporting party, because exporting party might propose single product, group of product, or wide system base. That is honestly to speak, that to say that this is rarely we can be found in any trade agreement. Unless on the specific issue, the importing party, exporting party may sit together based on in-depth consultation they have. Stronger discipline on the application of RCEP SPS participating countries, which include enhanced transparency, cooperation and technical consultation among RCEP members by strengthening and discipline implementation of 5, 12, 13, and 14, which is the contact point cooperation, transparency, and also technical consultations. If importing party, exporting party may utilize as maximum as can these articles, I do believe that will be reduce the trade cost in the border management inspection at the border of the importing party. Another one possible that how RCEP SPS provision could be implemented to reduce potential costs may rise on every business. As I say that Article 5, 9, 10, which is equivalence, certification, import check can be maximum again for the product testing. So the importing party may propose to the exporting party to implement entirely of the 3 articles in one. And this will be reduce the cost in pre-departure, in the border sample testing, and packaging and labeling, and so on in the exporting party. The second potential is may raise also the change of import protocol. Say again that, for instance, export approval, establishment registration requirements, industry management plans may propose to the importing party to strengthen the implementation of Article 5.5, 5.9, and 5.10. Increased compliance costs also sometimes happen in the border inspection at the importing party. So again, they engage technical expert or additional staff also may discuss early between the 2 parties. Sometimes also may happen delays in port clearance or rejection, demurrage or store and re-export costs. So this also can be utilized to maximize the 3 articles to reduce the potential cost in the importing party. Sometimes also quota administration, quota reallocation, and fill rate transparency. So also this is again that this could be resolved by strong consultation between the 2 parties through the implementation of Article 5, 9, and 10. So let me a little bit explain that risk analysis for FB in trading and in RCEP areas. Usually, for the food and beverage, the issue is mostly food safety issue, and of course, codex standard based on the SGR. RCEP SPS agree to have the SGR, especially codex standard on risk analysis. And this is in line with the Article 7.9, 7.8, 5.7. And when the importing party conduct risk assessment, so the exporting party might propose risk management option to achieve the appropriate level of protection of the importing party by implementing Article 5.8, Article 8.5.5, Article 5.9, and Article 8.10. So if importing party might maximize the use of risk management option based on the proposal of exporting party, and exporting party may propose single product, group of product of wide system base, and perhaps that this can be used, this can be reduced the potential cost in the importing party. It's possible there's no more inspection, there is no more check by check, import check. Because why? Because we are already strong cooperation to achieve the allowed of the importing party by the implementing such kind of articles. And one thing that the Article 5.7 that already noted, written that they have strong cooperation on risk analysis. There is no objection by the importing party to say that I don't have any time, because in the element provision of Article 5 already state very clear, and there is no excuse by the importing party that SGR cannot be implemented, because Article 5.7 already clear state about the recognize of SGR. Risk management option to achieve allowed. So I say again that exporting party may propose such kinds of the articles. And one the benefit, while importing party conduct the risk assessment, the exporting party may continue the exporting of F&B to the importing party. There is no permission. There is no decision by the importing party to stop the trade. This is very clear stated by the Article 5.7. So while the importing party assess the exporting party product, the continued trading of FB might still continue to the importing party. So this is especially on FB business impact. If this has happened for instance, for the exporting party, in various issues, for instance, the quota administration and import permit issue, shelf life, expiry date, product air conditions, compositional standard, inspection process. So again, that try to implement as maximum as can the Article 0.5, 0.9, 10, 8, then Article 5.5 is equivalent to reach consensus between the importing party and exporting party to achieve appropriate level of protections of the importing party. If border management happen again, sometimes issue may rise also in the border management. For instance, product registration and certification, quarantine health protocols and associated certification and compliance, labeling requirements, changing custom requirement in foreign market. So try to maximize this kind of articles. Again, dealing with the standard and hazard issue, packaging requirements, export certification, requirement for integrated establishment, maximum residual limit, MRL, or maximum permitted concentration, MPC, by the products in the of the exporting party. So again, they try to implement as maximum as possible this such kind of articles. In the border inspection, sample testing, establishment listing, port entry requirement, and pre-departure product testing also. This can be maximize the implementation of articles, certification, import check, audit, and equivalence. Perhaps they can be reached by consensus between the two parties. So how to gain to boost our beef food and beverage industry? I say again that there is no time to say that by the party that the importing party, the exporting party should sit together and empowering or strengthening technical consultation to resolve various aspects issue at the business. RCEP member country must strengthen technical consultation by maximizing the CP, contact point, and component authority, task and responsibility. And this is say that 1 month after the exporting party propose consultation, within the 6 months or 100 days, the importing party shall respond and to resolve aspect issue. So this is this is very good, these articles, because the time limit to finish this is sometimes honestly speaking that sometimes take time limit, take time years, 2 years, 5 years to settle down between the importing party, exporting party issue, dealing the market of the product. But in the Article 5.14, they clearly state that they only take at least 7 months already settled. So I think this is very sound good for the RCEP members to increase cooperation for the trading of both food and beverage in the RCEP members. And also the benefit of this to implement this article, because there is no media of communications that we can utilize teleconference, video conference, any other means. So beside, if the importing party, they have another reason that there is no time to meet physically. So teleconference, video conference is clearly stated in the articles. This is way to speed up the resolution of various aspects issue among the RCEP members. So what is the possible recommendations to encourage the food and beverage business in RCEP members? Each member should have a commitment to apply the SPS provision in a transparent and scientific sound basis. Maximizing the application of provision article, equivalence, risk analysis, audit, certification, import check to promote efficiency and effectiveness of F&B business in RCEP members. Strengthen cooperation and commitment of RCEP countries in food and beverage business by implementing article cooperation and capacity building, technical consultation, and contact point and competent authority. So this is my additional complement to the previous speaker. I thank you very much, and I apologize for that inconvenience. Thank you very much, and back to the moderators.
Thank you so much, Pak Arifin, for your comprehensive presentation. We will now, to complement the previous presentations on RO and SPS, we are now about to hear from Ms. Teresa Low, the program lead of ASEAN Food and Beverage Alliance. Ms. Teresa will be focusing more on the
There's no sound. The mic is not working.
Yeah, I think ASEAN Secretariat drop off the line.
apologies, Miss. We will now share the screen.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Ani, for the introduction, and a pleasure to be here with fellow speakers and also participants from the private sector. So as introduced, my name is Teresa, and today I represent the ASEAN Food and Beverage Alliance, AFBA, to share some perspective regarding our thoughts on RCEP and how it would impact the food industry. Next slide. So just want to give a quick introduction about AFBA. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, so AFBA, we comprises a group of different groups of national industry associations from the ASEAN countries, and currently we are represented by 7 ASEAN member states, and together with our partner Food Industry Asia, we work together to advocate for the interests of the food industry. And by and large, our objective is really to support harmonization efforts across the region and to provide a voice for the ASEAN food industry. So in terms of our representation, it cuts across small, medium, and large enterprises. Next slide. Yeah, so we are quite thrilled to hear about this webinar and how it focuses on the food and beverage industry. And just coincidentally, last year we also launched a report jointly with Food Industry Asia to look into RCEP, and in particular the key provisions that would be more relevant to the food and beverage sector. And in particular, our interest is really to see how it would overcome trade barriers, and of course, taking into consideration the reduction of tariffs as well. So most of the points that I'm sharing today are taken from this report that we launched last year. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is how I'll break down my presentation. First, looking at ASEAN as a whole and talking about economic integration, and then I'll move into the key provisions in RCEP that are relevant to the sector. And I'll just end off with the challenges that's faced by the industry and how RCEP could help. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, I think it's important at the outset just to lay out the background and the context of RCEP. And I think previous speakers has also talked a lot about the specific articles. I think this is just to take a step back for us to recall the key mandate of ASEAN in terms of regional integration, and how currently ASEAN is also moving into the AEC 2025. And as part of that whole picture, RCEP sits quite crucially under the pillar on linkages with global economy, and this really drives like ASEAN's mandate to push forward for regional integration, and in particular it's especially crucial during this time, even as we looked into economic recovery. I think more importantly, it also signals ASEAN's commitment to be outward-looking rather than moving into an inward-looking approach. Next slide. And just looking at how we also have various ASEAN +1 FTAs, and really like how RCEP comes into the picture. It's a single rule book that cuts across 15 RCEP participating countries, and with that, businesses can look into utilizing one FTAs to trade across different 15 countries. Next slide. And here, even as we are entering into like the half-year mark of 2022, and 6 months since the RCEP comes into force, I think from the business point of view, we are still monitoring how it would plays out, and also waiting for different other countries to ratify the RCEP. But nonetheless, I think it's quite evident in terms of the benefits of RCEP, and really, I think it's really up to the business to see how to leverage on RCEP, and also in line with the different product categories that the businesses are focusing on, and to determine which FTAs would be most beneficial. And here I just want to draw out 3 key points about RCEP that from our point of view would be rather significant. So I'll just start with regional accumulation mechanism, and we can move to the next slide. You could just click through all the points. Yeah, I think I'll just address it together. So I think what we had also heard earlier about ROO, and I think one key point is definitely about regional accumulation mechanisms, where it provides more flexibility for businesses to source their raw materials, intermediate products, and also in terms of the markets that they are exporting to. I think it's just quite notable that this is the first FTA that brings together China, Japan, and Korea within the same FTA. And during the preparation of the report that I mentioned earlier, we did a survey with our industry members, and what we observed is that food and beverage industry members, they do source from all these 15 countries, and I think with RCEP in place, it definitely bring in an extra benefits for the food sector. I think also just want to mention about the supply chain network and how this RCEP would help to build and strengthen the supply chain network. And I think in particular, beyond the obvious impact from the pandemic, I think what we are also foreseeing is the effects from climate change, and how the effects are often localized in terms of changes in weather, and having that flexibility to source from various countries within the region would definitely help businesses to respond quicker in terms of in times of any kind of disruption to any sourcing of particular materials, and they could quickly source it from a different market. And even as we also anticipate more vulnerability in the supply chain, I think having these provision in the FTA would help to strengthen the sector as a whole. Yeah, I think I would just go through a light touch on the remaining points about the unified and streamlined ROO, and also a single certificate of origin. I think these really are points that would help to ease the burden on the business, whereby it gives more flexibility, and also a easier pathway for businesses to comply to the requirements in order to enjoy the lower tariff rates. And next slide, I'll go into the trade mechanisms and how some of the key provisions, and of course, like there are definitely more, but just highlighting a few. If you could just click one more time, I think there's one more point. Yeah, so we can see here there are provisions regarding written advance rulings, which I think it's important to provide predictability for the industry. And advanced ruling provisions, they can be found in other FTAs as well, but for RCEP, it covers a more comprehensive scope in terms of the origin, the classification, and also the valuation of goods at the customs, and having it in written and binding for at least 3 years. And this definitely gives certainty to the importer and exporter to know that to avoid any kind of like issues at the customs, and they are able to clear their goods at the border. And also earlier speaker also mentioned about provisions for approved exporter, and this would allow them to make a self-declaration in terms of the origin rather than going through that process of obtaining a certificate of origin. And on the last point about easier clearance or rather a quicker clearance for goods, and it's stated here 48 hours, and also for perishable goods from custom controls within 6 hours of arrival. So that's definitely something that would benefit the food sector, even as we think about agricultural products and fresh goods that are more that have shorter shelf life, and these provisions would help. I think all in all here, we from our first experience in also advocating for the industry, we also view that often the challenge comes in the procedures. So we call it like the procedural challenges to comply with, and that increase the compliance cost. So looking at all these different measures, it helps to reduce the time and the cost for businesses to comply, especially pre-border stage as well as at the border stage. And I think all these things would definitely add up to make a more efficient market access. I think another point to make here is like even as we have all these like very significant provisions in the various chapters like RO and also the SPS struck up chapters, I think what we also hope to highlight is that the key is also in the implementation of all these provisions, because often we know that there are different stakeholders that are involved, like the trade negotiators as well as the custom authorities, and could also involve the food authorities as well. And there needs to be also a clear communication across the different ministries and agencies to ensure that whatever that's agreed upon by the RCEP participating countries are also effectively being communicated to the different agencies and also implemented on the ground. And I'll move to the next slide, talking about stronger disciplines on the application of non-tariff measures by RPCs. And I think what we see here is, I mentioned about increased predictability, which is really a key for businesses. And secondly here, just want to highlight on the need for transparency as well. And I think Pak Arif earlier also mentioned a lot about the specific points related to transparency and how it points to the WTO rules and even like certain provisions that are in addition to that as well. So I think that also like ties into the whole framework of good regulatory practice and how there needs to be consultation in the process of any new or changes to regulations or requirements, and that helps to lower down the kind of surprises for the businesses during import and export, and with a good awareness of the requirements, this definitely helps to reduce any non-compliances from the industry. Yeah, and that also ties into the second point about technical consultation as well, like providing like clear and predictable processes and timeline. And I think this really requires the political will and commitment from the different RCEP participating countries as well. And on the last point about the sectoral initiative, we thought that that's quite a good good point that's being included in the RCEP. And even as RCEP participating countries are still going through the process of implementation and also ratification, I think in time to come, we do hope that we do anticipate like more discussion around sectoral initiatives, because from the experience during the pandemic, we realized that it's really important to acknowledge the how the food sector as an essential sector, rather than going by the tariff line. And I think what we are seeing is that maybe it's more beneficial to treat it as a whole, as a sector as a whole. And what we are looking at here is that there can be more discussions around on this particular work program, and in particular tackling non-tariff measures within the food sector. Okay, next slide. And I'm almost to the end of my presentation. I think just want to end off with the importance to address non-tariff barriers or that comes from non-tariff measures. So even as we look at the range of benefits that comes from RCEP, I think that it's important that we also tackle NTMs in parallel as well, in order to fully benefit from the tariff liberalization from RCEP. As we know that often what the industry's challenge is that there are still a whole range of NTMs from the different countries that that's usually the more difficult challenge for the industry. But regardless, we feel that RCEP definitely comes in at a timely manner, and we do look forward to really the effective implementation of all these different provisions, and how the food sector can be also considered in the future work program as part of the sectoral initiatives. Yeah, last slide, I think. One more. Yeah, so I think this is just to close off my talk today. And here's just a one-pager summary of what we have included in the report. And just feel free to scan on a QR code to retrieve that document. It contains some key steps to guide businesses in how to enjoy the benefits from RCEP, and what are some of the key areas that will be relevant for the food sector. So with that, I will close off my presentation today, and I'll hand it back to Ani. Thank you.
Ms. Teresa. Now we will hear more from the private sectors themselves in the panel discussions. I would like to hand it over to Ms. Maria Esperanza Alconcel to lead the discussion that will be followed with the Q&A session. Ms. Maes is the National Project Coordinator for Rice Plus Philippines project from the International Trade Center. Ms. Maes, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Annie. So good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank, of course, the organizers, ASEAN Secretariat, the East Asia Business Council, for this opportunity to be able to participate in this very important session, especially since the F&B sector, the MSMEs participating, they really comprise of MSMEs benefiting from this sector. So it's very important. And of course, second, I'd like to thank the speakers a while ago, the presenters, who were able to provide us an overview about the provisions of the RCEP, how the companies can benefit from the RCEP provisions. And lastly, of course, to my co-panel discussants, I'd like to thank you for participating in this event. And first, I'd like to introduce them one by one. So first one is Mr. Daniel Wright, or Dan, who is the Customs and R&D Manager, Group Tax and Customs of Fonterra Cooperative Group Limited. The second one is Mr. Kim Minsho, or we can just call him Minsho, Deputy Director, East Asian FTA. He's been of the Bureau, Ministry of Trade and Industry and Energy Republic of Korea, South Korea. And then, of course, and the third one is Mr. Kalum Chen, who is the Managing Director of LH Plus and the President of Malaysian Consortium of Mid-Tier companies. So for this panel session, what I will be doing is to have two rounds of questions, two sets of questions. And for each question, the panel discussants will be given 5 minutes each to answer the question. So the first one, so we've heard about all these, expanded market access, cost saving opportunities through the tariff savings, trade facilitation initiatives under the RCEP. We also heard about more transparent and more predictable trading environment in the region. And then we also heard about opportunities to address non-tariff challenges for companies, which is very important for the F&B sector. And my question is for our panel discussants, are there companies already using the RCEP? Because from the implementation date, which is 1st January 2022, I've never encountered a company actually who mentioned to me that they're using the RCEP. So I'll be very interested to know whether you or one of your members, or probably for Minsho, in Korea, since in Korea you even have an academy promoting the use of FTAs. So are there companies in Korea that are using the RCEP benefits? Yeah, so that will be my question. If you're not using or taking advantage of the RCEP benefits, why are you not using, or why the companies are not using the RCEP? What are the challenges that they're facing? Because I know there's a lot of issues, concerns that companies need to take into consideration whenever they utilize an FTA. Yeah. So probably we can have Dan first, and then Mr. Kalum, and probably Minsho. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Maze. So, hi everybody, I'm Dan Wright from Fonterra. I'm based in New Zealand, but we have manufacturing sites in Malaysia and in Indonesia. We have presence all around the APAC region, so we're quite au fait with the different trade agreements. And to answer your question straight away, we are not using RCEP, and we won't be using RCEP for any foreseeable future. The reason being is that we trade in dairy products and subcategories of dairy products. And New Zealand is a very aggressive trading partner. We've been trading and creating FTAs for a long time. We export out of New Zealand, Malaysia, Australia, and Indonesia, and in some parts in Thailand as well. And they're already covered by incredibly extensive trade agreements that are down to zero already with most of these trade agreements. what we find with RCEP is that the tariff elimination process starts at about to get to zero in about 15 to 20 years. That's for countries that even ratify it. So it's a long-term strategy. We are looking long-term whether we can further expand our exports out of Malaysia and Indonesia into markets not necessarily covered by good market access, such as Korea and Japan. But at the end of the day, it comes back to our customers. What do our customers and our importers want to use? And when we, as CPTPP as an example, you know, that's been ratified for a while now and in force, and we really struggle to get any customers to use it because in Vietnam is a good example. ANZFITA is already at zero. It's a tried and true system. They know what a certificate of origin is. The customs agencies know what that certificate of origin is. And they, unless there is another incentive outside of duty by way of pure trade facilitation, removing NTBs or anything like that, they're just not willing to buy into it. They're just happy with the status quo.
Thanks, Dan. So probably can go to Mr. Callum. Callum, you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. First of all, let me explain about mid-tier companies. Definition of mid-tier companies in Malaysian ringgit. If you're in the services sector, your turnover should be minimum 20 million to 500 million ringgit per annum. Manufacturing is 50 to 500 million. But many of our members actually are doing about 750, 800 million ringgit turnover. We used to be lumped together with the SMEs, but now the government is seeking us out because mid-tier companies form only 1.7% of all companies in Malaysia. Very small, 1.7%. We employ 16% of total workforce, down from 22% in 2016. Reason is because companies expanded, but many companies automated. And because of that, we grew much faster. But this 1.7% of total companies in Malaysia contributes to 39.9% of Malaysia's total GDP. So it's very powerful. So we were established a couple of years back, and we're beginning to grow. To answer your question, Miss, RCEP basically is ASEAN 10 plus Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and China. And as we all know, as you know, Don mentioned earlier on, all this are really trading with them, not much of a problem. But I do understand that RCEP is supposed to be more inclusive and more comprehensive. And of course, it's meant to be more, not just exporting, but more like bilateral trade, importing as well. And one of the challenges our members face with or without RCEP has always been the non-tariff barrier. I can see that every country is putting a lot of effort over many years, especially all the negotiation and everything to get things done. And again, of course, every country hope and try to protect themselves. Not wrong, but when all these things at the end it's being finally finalized, but you still have all the non-tariff barriers, then I think this will defeat the whole purpose. You know, it's just like, you know, saying one thing and doing something else. But having said that, I always believe that we should look at it from a very positive angle. Don't say why it's not working. We should ask ourselves, what can we do and what should we do to make it work? And more importantly, how can we help the small and medium-sized enterprise, which is the backbone of most countries, to move to the next level of competency so that they can do it? And we are very fortunate in Malaysia because our Ministry of International Trade and Industry, through MIDA, you know, the Malaysian Industrial Development Authority, has been promoting and encouraging foreign direct investment as well as domestic direct investment, so that companies can move to the next level, invest, use the latest technology, be more competitive, upgrade the quality, and move to the next level. And then we're also very lucky because we have MATRADE, the Malaysian External Trade Agency, helping us, especially SMEs, to move in that direction. So basically, Madrid has done 3 points, 3 big things to help the SMEs and the mid-tier companies to capitalize on RCEP opportunities. The first one is providing relevant market information, trade opportunities in RCEP member country economies, and leveraging on Madrid's international network at least 15 Madrid offices located throughout the countries in RCEP. So we are already in all these countries. But again, next level is people know that, you know, it's all there. How can we make it happen? The information is, the writings on the wall. And second thing is that connecting Malaysian SMEs and mid-tier companies with potential business partners, buyers, as well as to facilitate companies establishing their footprints in these countries. So we're going to work very closely with all the trade commissioners to help all these companies take full advantage of RCEP. And of course, then the third one is that Madrid is undertaking various trade promotional programs in RCEP member economies. In 2022, 53% of all the trade promotions programs have been targeted to be arranged to countries under RCEP, out of which 14 programs will be for trade fairs, 8 programs for export-related, and 5 on international sourcing program, where Malaysia will bring in these buyers from RCEP countries to come and visit us to do, business matching, and also to encourage them on trade investment. You see, when we talk about RCEP, first thing to come to mind, everybody talk about exporting out. Yes, that's not wrong. But equally important, we talk about bilateral trade, where we bring the products into Malaysia, and how we can use products that are made maybe cheaper. There's milk powder, for example. It's so popular in Malaysia, and there's a big shortage of that. Milk powder, you bring in, certain goods from Vietnam, from Indonesia, to be assembled here, value added, re-exported, or for domestic market or both. And I think this is where we talk about the bilateral trade. The business matching part is very, very important. Where 1 + 1 is not 2, but 3 or 4 or 5. Yeah, thank you.
Alan, for that one. Yeah, also let's hear from Min Shop. So how are Korean companies doing in terms of utilizing the RCEP benefits at the moment?
Especially Korean companies are currently using the RCEP much. I checked the statistics once by 1 month ago's statistics, but I cannot say specifically, but the utilization ratio is currently the low side, about below the 20%. Of course, we get a lot of questions about the utilization of the RCEP from many Korean companies, but I don't know exactly the why. But all the FTAs are like that. At the first time, we have a low utilization of their FTAs, but after some years later, we get a high level of utilization. The lower stages require more time to using the FTA. I think that we should check the Korean side has a Korea ASEAN FTA is being utilized in advance. In some cases, RCEP tariffs are not immediately eliminated. Therefore, some products, some goods has the lower tax rather than RCEP. So, and let's check the Korea ASEAN FTA statistics. When the Korean ASEAN FTA started in 2007, it was only low level of imports and exports, but it was doubled at the trade volume in 2021. So I think that is not the time problem. And in addition, it is necessary to substantially inform the use of accumulation or origin, rules of origin, which are the strengths of the RCEP. To this To this end, Korea is implementing policies such as various consultations and consult for the expert companies and briefing sessions for the companies. And we need to check the SPS side. It is also necessary to check the imports must go through the procedures for such as quarantine. So it's not the we get a low tariffs from the RCEP, but it is not clear the quarantine side. We need to check the quarantine side, so it needs some more time to get benefit of RCEP. And lastly, in the FMB market, I think import and export is not determined simply by the FTAs. We also need to consider the weakness of the other supply chains. For example, domestic logistics and the use of data and e-commerce. In the Korean side, the most important thing is not only the tariffs. I think we need to check the supply chain or the domestic procedures of distribution, and we need to check the distribution authorities, packaging companies, and logistic companies. It is more important, I think. Not just the FTA side. We need to check all the sides, I think.
Thank you, Minsho. Yeah, I agree with all your points. And probably just to add, you know, the MSMEs, they really don't have the capacity actually to understand clearly what are the benefits for them when they use the FTAs. So they need to see how they can reduce their cost using the FTAs, how they can increase their profit using the FTAs, you know, the tariff savings, identifying what will be the FTA rates for their specific products. You know, they also need to compare with the existing FTAs as well. So if the level of the margin of preference is low, so it doesn't make sense for them to comply with all the requirements, ROO, the certificate of origin, or origin of declaration, when the benefits, the tariff savings that they can get is not commensurate to the time, the cost, the effort that they need to put in when taking advantage of the RCEP. And I've seen many in the chat, they're saying that at the moment, the margin of preference in the RCEP, if you compare it with the other ASEAN FTAs, actually the other ASEAN FTAs are still much higher than currently the RCEP preferential tariffs. But I think in the future, as Dan has mentioned, in the long term, probably businesses can look into how they can include RCEP as part of their strategy, especially when it comes to, you know, value chain, supply chain in the region. That's very important for the F&B sector. Another thing that probably I'd like to mention as well, as one of the challenges for companies, not just for RCEP, but in common in FTAs, most of the time it's not the measures or the initiatives that are the problem for companies. Most of the time, it's how the governing rules are implemented by the authorities. You know that most of the time they have a different understanding, interpretation of the governing rules and regulations under the FTAs. So it's always difficult for companies to you know use or leverage the FTAs, because in one country they would say, oh, you need to do this. In another country, they would say, you need to do that. So there's no common understanding or interpretation on how the rules should be applied. So that's one problem that companies are facing, which I think, yeah. So Dan would agree on that. Carla would agree on that, because you've been using the FTAs. You would know how difficult it is.
Again,
Yeah.
Sorry, you go first.
Just an example. So one of the companies, F&B companies that I've talked to, they mentioned about the advanced rulings. Advanced rulings, like these advanced rulings mechanisms. But then, is the advanced ruling in the exporting country actually recognized or acknowledged in the importing country? Most of the time, it's not. So you need to apply for both in the exporting and importing country. So these are the actual examples. Probably Dan or Callum can cite more examples about these things.
Okay, let me clarify before I start that I'm not here to pinpoint or blame any country. And like I said, a lot of work has been put in by everyone, all the negotiators in each of the various countries. But the point is that, let me ask you this question, base. You spoke about SME. Everybody talk about that. They should do this, they should do that. Most, if not all, mid-tier companies in Malaysia were once SME. We were once SMEs too. Then let me ask the next question. Which company wouldn't want to expand and grow the business if they have the opportunity? Everybody wants to do that. But then you see, you can take the horse, you can lead the horse to the water, to the river, but you cannot make them drink. So those companies who wants to improve, wants to upgrade, wants to expand, would have done it already. And those companies who are not ready for whatever reasons, it's a hierarchy of needs. They are not ready and they are not ready. We have to accept the fact. So it will be the mid-tier companies who, the reality on the ground, it will be the mid-tier companies and the more forward-thinking SMEs who will be moving to the next level of competition to keep improving, keep upgrading. And like I say, usually it's not the exporting country. It is always the importing countries who make it very difficult to put their product in, for example. I don't want to mention names, but I think you all probably would know. We take biscuits, for example. Just an example, biscuits. We want to export from Malaysia to country B in the RCEP country. And they say, oh, no, now because you want to export to my country, you must have everything in my national language. Not a problem. That can be done. But even then, when you translate, they keep on saying, no, this is wrong, that is wrong. And so you cannot export that. And the next thing they say is that, we don't recognize your standards. You have to, make sure that you pass our standards. And people keep on doing that. And it is a very tiring and a very expensive kind of lessons, And in the end, people get frustrated. I want to go into country, you all did so much talk about all this, and we actually walk the talk, all this thing comes in. So this is one of the biggest challenge in making RCEP work, or not just RCEP, any free trade agreement for the matter, to make it work and work effectively. If you're really open, Malaysia would say it's very open. I've been involved with the BT, on all this discussion for a long time. We always complain, why is our government making it so easy for people to export their products to us, and then even our own product is so difficult to get registered. And when we want to export to that country, it is so difficult to do it. So this is some of the challenges. And the other point is that many of the SMEs especially, the priority is not to do export. The priority is to make sure that they get the business, get the money to buy the raw material, get production out, send the goods out, collect money, and live to fight another day. So it's the hierarchy of needs again. So this, unless, of course, these are individual countries which we have to address ourselves and which we are fully aware of. And that's why at the end of the day, it goes to all these sectorial associations to make sure that they take care of themselves. In the case of the mid-tier companies, we cover all sectors. So it's more challenging, but then we try to do more. It will be at the end, the sectorial. Let's say the Plaza Association, for example, where I'm the honorary president. I will have to play my role together with the current president and the committee member to lead and guide, because 80% of our members are SMEs. But then it will be much easier because it's very specific. I don't know whether the rest of you will agree.
Thanks, Callum. Yeah, well, probably you can hear from Dan as well. While you're used, Dan.
Sure. So just going to that point on the on the implementation side. So one thing that's always critical and fails in some FTAs is the implementation process, the transition from policy and intent to operational. And the operational side very rarely aligns. One thing you alluded to before is what is really good about RCEP is the self-declaration process. We are huge proponents of that. Every country we operate in where we self-certify, be it Thailand, be it Malaysia, under our bilateral agreements, we have no issues with FTAs. As soon as you introduce an FTA certificate of origin, we have issues everywhere in the world. So we are huge proponents of that, and it's a great step that they've done. We really wish they had moved to the importer certification side, like within CPTPP, but we'll deal with what we've got. It's just the markets that we're dealing with. The one thing that people need to understand, though, is that the rules within the FTA talk about the exporter's responsibilities and that they've got to conform to the exporter's regulations and laws. However, on many FTAs that we deal with, as Callum alluded to and as he self alluded to, most countries write regulations on how to import it, and they don't always align with what the exporter says. Now, under most FTAs, you can actually go back to an issuing body if your importer has an HS code that your certificate doesn't match with, and they will deal with it from a government to government perspective. It takes a long time. Don't expect bureaucrats to be very quick, okay? But that's a government to government solution, right? Because they're an issuing body. Now this gets put on you as an exporter. Now you're expected to do this, right? You're expected as an approved exporter overseen by your exporting customs authority to make sure that you align with the customs export and the export regulations, and also deal with your importing customer over there who might and very likely getting challenged by the local customs because your HS code's wrong or the format's wrong. The other side of it as well, from an implementation point of view, and I said this before, they will interpret things a little bit differently, right? And it's purely an interpretation issue. The ANSFItter was a really good example where the 3-day rule came into play, and some countries interpreted what day that actually started and what day it didn't. Something so small as that all of a sudden had your FTA turned down. So you've just got to get good local knowledge, go talk to your local trade ministries or customs agencies. What does this mean? What do I have to do in order for us to get the preference that you're trying to incentivize to obtain? How do we actually do this? Most of those agencies will have a center of excellence which talks about that, and they'll provide you with information. And we really hope that they do on how to actually do it. We just hope that the rules all align.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, so I agree with both of you. There's a lot of opportunities in the RCEP, and it's just really a matter of promoting helping companies how to take advantage of this, understanding how to take advantage of this, and I would say, as Callum has mentioned, the mid-tier company is actually very important. Actually, the medium companies and even the big companies, whenever you promote cross-border trade for them, you facilitate cross-border trade for them, because they source raw materials from the MSMEs. So, directly and indirectly, RCEP would benefit MSMEs because even if they are not involved directly in exporting their products, if you source raw materials from them, they are actually indirectly exporting their products. That's why it's very important that we have this RCEP, I would say, and then making sure that it's implemented successfully is probably one of the things that we need to aim for, especially during this year. And that would take me to my next question for our panelists. What would be your recommendations in exploiting or reaping the benefits offered under the RCEP agreement? I'd like to hear interventions, for instance, what companies can do, the industry associations, or what we call business support organizations, what they can do to help companies, and of course, government intervention. But I want to hear more of what can we do in more practically, easier things to implement the moment, not things that it's hard because it's not easy really to implement FTAs, and especially for RCEP. So I would say if we can provide them practical insights, recommendations on what can be done at the moment to promote the utilization of RCEP by our companies in the region. Maybe we can start with Minshop.
Oh, yes. I think that the most important thing for using the RCEP for SMEs, well, almost every company is SMEs, not the big companies, is only the small company. So the most important thing is the government provides its best support to the RCEP companies, because in fact, there's the possibility that the large companies like Samsung, LG, they can easily use the accumulation. However, it can be not easy for the SMEs to utilize the accumulation or ROO part. It's very hard thing. And I have been RCEP briefing sessions with SMEs in the Korean companies or any other companies to the Korea to the another countries, but they are very hard to understand the RCEP's benefit. It was very hard thing. Professional customer brokers also need to study the RCEP to understand the benefit of the RCEP. But how the small business owners understand the RCEP benefit easily is very, very hard thing. I think that so. In government office, as a government officer, I need to understand as a government officer, I need to study the RCEP to understand it. So it is very hard to understand it and using the theory. So in fact, it is quite difficult to develop the self-sufficiency. So the government needs to all the support for the RCEP. I think that one export process should be supported by only one export support process, supported by the government or other organizations like Korea has the quota to support the trade, and any organizations will be good. Such consulting or such process is needed the most, I think, and it is good to do such consulting in one country. In fact, it is very good to do it in all other countries at the same educational program or same example program. It can be expensive, but I think that if the know-how is accumulated, I think that this will be the cheaper one, I think. We needed the many consultants to support the RCEP countries in the RCEP countries. I think that such cooperation projects are necessary in the RCEP for all RCEP countries make the such a consultation system within through the RCEP cooperation at RCEP Ecotech project. It will be a good thing for the SMEs in all the RCEP countries. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Minshop. Dan, let's see. How about you? Let's hear from you. Thank you.
Sure. So, look, when you look at the tariff schedules within RCEP, within food and beverage industry, there are quite a lot of tariff lines that go to zero from year one. Unfortunately, not in my industry, not for a very long time in some countries, if ever, in some particular economies, but there are opportunities there. And the governments need to actually have a strong hand in this around incentivizing exporters and importers from utilizing this. How they do that, well, that's up to them, but my recommendations would be that there are various agencies out there, and to count New Zealand as one, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise are out in every single major region for New Zealand exporters, and they are on the ground. It's a New Zealand agency, but they employ locals. And they're there to help New Zealand exporters get better market access understand the local rules and provide good, clear guidance. And it's a fantastic way for, in particular, SMEs, without paying thousands and thousands for local consultants, to give them good advice on how to build their business in these regions. We see this often with new FTAs where they really go out there and do that. And I hope there are other economies out there that have similar programs, because without the actual tariff benefit out there, there's got to be other incentives that they look at. Now, the rules within RCEP are good, especially around things like direct consignment, and that makes it a lot easier from a supply chain point of view to actually ship into the RCEP regions. So, you know, there's really got to be an emphasis there by these governments to do this. And, you know, one thing they'll probably learn from CPTPP is they haven't done that well with this, because we get a lot of questions why no one's using CPTPP when all of the other trade agreements we have are already at zero. So as an example with that, we've got CPTPP and ANSFITA into some markets. It's the same tariff rate, but everybody wants to still use ANSFITA. So, you know, learn from that, look at how they actually can drive RCEP in some of these regions. And yeah, good luck to them. And I hope it works well, but it's a long-term strategy for us for sure on that global sourcing side of it.
Thank you, Dan. And of course, let's hear from Cal. What would be your recommendation?
Amazing. I would use the word Dan used earlier on, alignment. Before you know, pot calling a kettle black, before you tell people what to do, we should put our house in order. We are very fortunate because we work very closely with our government department, especially with the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, together with all the agencies. We are a small country. We export tremendously. And so because of that, our government is very pro-business. And not only that, they also are more willing to listen to our comments. And then I was asked to present on behalf of the Malaysian Consortium of Mid-Tier Companies to the Economic Action Council under the EPU, Economic Planning Unit in the PM's department, where we were told to be very upfront, very honest, what are the issues, and not only what are the issues, what are our recommendations, which we think we could work. So we presented. Then later on, we were given the chance to present to the Minister of Finance on, of course, during the last 2 years, through webinars, virtual meeting, and also to the Prime Minister. And I'm glad to say that they were very open. You know, they did not accept everything we recommended, but they took in strides. They did step by step, and a lot of things were implemented and improved upon. And I think all of us will agree that the last 2-3 years the last 3 years especially, has been very challenging. And this is where the government came in to help. And of course, one of the issues we spoke about was, one of the recommendations I said was that the government should have a coordinated, training for all the senior officers so that everybody is on the same page and there will be no misinterpretation and no little Napoleons. I'm not talking bad about government. No, not like that. It's just that human being human. We tend to look at things differently. And what I see and what you see and how you interpret and how I interpret is totally different. That's why these are the things. Amaze, you also mentioned about the micro SMEs, why they're so important. And one of the things we spoke about, which I presented to our government, was that when you look at the multinational corporations, most MNCs prefer to work with the mid-tier companies for one simple reason. Number one, we have all the ISO certification which they need. Number two, we are able to meet all those compliances set upon by them and their customers. Number three, when it comes to the hardware, the software, and the skill labor, we have them. And remember, we were once SME, but we are those companies who have gone through many storms, weathered many crises, and came out stronger and wiser. And what does not kill you make you stronger. But when we get a job from the multinational companies, we do not work in isolation. We then work with the SMEs and further down the micro, SMEs, where they supply the parts, the components, the packaging items, and all that. So the whole supply chain is activated. So when we're able to bring that up, so we said you cannot just take care of the SMEs, but also the mid-tiers and of course the MNCs. And this is what we're doing. And like I said, we are fortunate because our government we have very close contact with them. I always call for meeting where our opinions are sought, taken into account, and then implemented. Not always in that manner, but usually in that manner. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Those are really very good points, I would say. But before I summarize those points that we have, including the speakers a while ago, the recommendations on what can be done to reap the benefits under the RCEP, we'll have a few minutes for the Q&A session. May I call on the presenters a while ago to also join us here, because there are questions that are also directed towards you. So Annie, if you can just ask them to join again, please. Also, we saw some questions in the chat box, and some of our speakers, Cheska and Minchopa, have been answering them, replying to them. But probably just for the first question for the Q&A, can I have this? What's the status of the ratification process for the Philippines and Indonesia? So that because we need to also update our companies, you know. So I just like to update our participants here. So if Cheska and probably our speaker from Indonesia can just answer my first question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the very good question. Perhaps the ratification of the SPS agreement now is still in progress in the parliament. Perhaps, hopefully that in the next few months, the process of ratification perhaps can be finalized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arifin. Cheska?
Thank you for that question, Ma. It's a favorite question in all forums. As you know, the Philippine Senate is currently in recess as we just had our elections. So we will resume Senate deliberations towards the end of this month. The government is still targeting to have the RCEP ratification process completed within the first half of the year so that we can be implementing the agreement starting July. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheska. Okay, so we can now go to the questions of our participants. I have a question here, which was submitted before the event. So promoting mediation out of court settlement option or the alternative dispute resolution under the RCEP, can someone, probably from our negotiators, talk about the dispute settlement mechanism provision of the RCEP, how our companies can take advantage of that? Maybe Minshop, Cheska can help us answer that question.
I'm a RCEP of Korean side, but I'm not charge of this part. So my answer is so restricted. However, I know that SPS part does not apply to the dispute settlement. I think that when the disputes will be realized in the FMB market, it will be engaged in the SPS part almost fully. But therefore, there is a question as to whether dispute settlement, including consultations, will be applied to the FMB market according to the 19.3 of the agreement, I think. Anyway, so in this case, we can choose the consultations. Responding party sure to reply the request for consultations within 7 days and enter into consultations within 13 days. However, about the perishable goods, the time limit is 15 days. I think that many FMB products is perishable products. The time limit is 15 days, I think. After that, the parties to the dispute should engage in consultations and make every effort to reach a mutually agreed solution. And the consultation will not restrict the rights of the party to the dispute in any proceedings because it is just only a consultations. It is just a brief. Yes, it's it. Better.
Thank you, Minshop. Who else can answer that question, Mr. Arifin or Cheska? And I saw, Dan, would you want to say something as well on this question?
With regard to the SPS chapters, that all differences to the RCEP member who implement SPS chapter doesn't a consensus among the others. So they will bring to the Committee of Trade in Good in the RCEP agreement. Now this I know, but the right of the members, if they cannot resolve the differences among others, so they could bring directly to the SPS committee of the WTO to the official channel to the committee of SPS during the SPS committee meeting in the WTO. This I believe there could be but so far that perhaps that for the next hopefully that during the implementation, all differences to some RCEP members can be resolved in the Committee of Trade in Good. Thank you very much.
Cheska, and then we'll have Dan to also answer.
Thank you, Mais. This is not exactly alternative dispute resolution mechanism, since those are usually for government to government situations. But there are provisions on consumer protection which can be availed by the public. But maybe what would be useful for companies to know is that in RCEP, there are designated contact points per chapter. And if, let us say, a business is facing an SPS-related issue, a tariff-related issue, a customs-related issue, you are encouraged to contact the focal point of your country so that they can coordinate directly with their counterpart abroad. I guess this would be very important for those handling perishable goods or whose shipments are being held at port. Outside of that, there are also technical consultation mechanisms which require that issues be resolved within 180 days. So I don't expect this will be utilized for issues where there are goods on the way to the destination or at port. But these are really for concerns of the private sector. If you have difficulties hurdling specific import licensing procedures, or let's say SPS measures, and you would like to get technical assistance, more information, or assistance with processing your applications, those technical consultations can be activated by your government. So I would suggest businesses looking to utilize RCEP to get to know the focal points of your country so that if there are any issues that you face with respect to the implementation of the agreement, they can assist you directly. So in the Philippines, my bureau handles this, and we do encourage our businesses to reach out to us in case they face any issues with respect to the agreement. Thank you.
Dan?
I'll talk about it from a dispute resolution from the tariff and the certificates of origin point of view. As I said before, dispute resolution is not a quick turnaround, especially when they're around certificates of origin in particular. Our experience with these sorts of issues, it's only the large companies that want to do it, but usually because the number's big. The small and medium countries just want the problem to go away, right? And usually by doing that, it doesn't actually resolve the issue. When you look at some of the other trade agreements which involve subcommittees on rules of origin, some of those disputes can go on for years, and they can be, what is a minor discrepancy in a COO? Do we use a tick or a cross? These are the mundane things that they can argue about, and they go on for years. Keep in mind the amount of countries that are in RCEP. To get a consensus over a 2 or 3 day working group is unlikely every year. And usually it's every year they have these meetings. Also keep in mind that ASEAN have to talk as one voice. So if one of the ASEAN parties don't agree and all the others do, that the answer's still no. So that's why a lot of those things can take a long, long time. And unfortunately, our experience is the only way to do it is through the court system. So yeah, it's a problematic thing, but that's with all FTAs. So it's great that the governments do get involved sometimes to try and deal with it. But in the private sector, you want it resolved yesterday, and the government don't do that. So yeah, it's a drawn out process for sometimes something very immaterial around putting a number in a certificate of origin or something along those lines. You've just got to be prepared that if you're a small and medium business, you probably need to find an alternative.
Thanks, Danielle. That's okay. Those are really very good points that you raise. Hopefully, that our companies would be able to, and benefit or use this strategies or points that you mentioned. And another question here that we have is how to improve our businesses for 2022 and 2023. So probably we can have our industry associations here, for instance, AFBA, Callum, yeah, and who else can we have here to answer this question? Maybe Dan. so since you've been using the FTA, so probably you can also provide some insights on this question.
Sorry, Mas, can you just articulate the question for me again? Sorry.
So the question is how to improve our business for 2022 and 2023, probably taking into consideration the RCEP, like how probably to incorporate RCEP in their business model, strategy, business operations. Yeah,
look, I mean, first and foremost, we are really looking at building our business within the ASEAN group. Malaysia and Singapore and Indonesia are important strategically for us from a global supply chain point of view. Geographically, Southeast Asia, China, and North Asia are important for us. We are the largest dairy exporter in the world, but the global supply chain issues, and New Zealand being at the bottom of the world, there's very few boats that want to come down here because it's not cost effective. So we're looking at ways of optimizing our supply chain within the SCA and APAC area to get our products closer to the markets that we need to. Building and optimizing our manufacturing and our distribution centers within Southeast Asia is really key to us. And it's only going to get harder with the supply chain issues going on this stage. So from 2022, and I mean, this has been something that's been going on for the last couple of years since COVID, we are focusing on around building our products and getting it out to the markets, local, e-commerce, B2C, all of that sort of stuff. The Asian area is massively important for us. So, if we can optimize the rules within RCEP to benefit our business, because we can globally pull now we can bring in products from Korea, Japan, and everything, which we couldn't do under our other trade agreements because we primarily use a New Zealand dairy product. So, yeah, we are doing that, and it's we look forward to it. Hopefully, it all works out well.
Thanks, Dan. Teresa, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I think from AFBA's perspective, and also from as a trade association, I think we do engage with our trade ministries from countries, and what you observe is that they are actually very interested to hear industry's experience, in particular utilizing FTAs or even RCEPs, and I think the panel has also contributed very useful insights. So I think as a business, it would be, as much as we hope that the agencies would take proactive actions, I think from the industry we play a role as well in terms of contributing our experiences and our concerns and how things have been going, and I think these are very useful information for the ministries, even as they go through the reviews, or even they looked at the different texts in the agreements, and these would help to guide them to know how to improve or strengthen the agreements. So yeah, I think proactive engagement from the industry as well with the different government agencies. Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa. Callum, something to add to that?
Dan, I agree with you. It's expensive to go all the way to New Zealand. Expand your investment in Malaysia. We are very friendly, and you've been here a long time, and it's working well. You see, I will look at this with all the logistics disruption, with the oil, the Ukraine-Russia war and all that. with prices of oil and everything going up as a result of that, because of the whole supply chain, things will only get more and more expensive, and inflation will keep going up. In Malaysia, we have one more big issue. I was telling the government the other day when they asked me to present to the Economic Action Council again on how to encourage more direct, more domestic direct investment. And I said, the answer is simple. Again, it will be the mid-tier companies who will be investing in all this. One of the biggest issues we face is always labor issue, manpower. I said, as of the fourth quarter, Q4 of 2021, Malaysia's unemployment rate was 4.3%, which is translate to be about 691,000 people, about less than 700,000. And I said, in most countries, including US and all that, anything between 4 to 5% unemployment is considered full employment. It's not because there is a lack of opportunities, but more importantly, it's because many of these people chose not to work. So it's not how much you pay them, and I say, we should then look at foreign labor as something more positive. They are helping the industries and the country to bring in more foreign exchange. And if our people are really fully employed in that sense, working as, the quality inspectors, the line leaders, the technicians, the engineers, so let that be. Because at the end, we still need operators. One of the ways which we are telling our government is that we should encourage more and more automation. We should really doing that. And we have the smart automation grants, which started with about 250 million ringgit on a one-to-one matching grant. And it was used up very, very quickly. So I say, if there's a case, put in more money. And if used up again, keep on adding back to it, because I'm one of the recipients of that automation grants. And we cut our headcount. I say, irrespective of whatever industry you're in, irrespective of whatever size you're, whether you're the MNC, you're the mid-tier, you're the SMEs, the department and the section that uses the most people will always be assembly and the packaging. I think all of you will agree. And in my case, through automation, working with our engineers and the local suppliers, we were able to cut headcount by 80% per line per shift. And not only that, space utilization, because it's so much more compact, we only use 40% of the total space use. And most important of all, output went up 2.5 to 3 times. And that's how you become competitive. And that's how you do. And when people talk about automation, the first thing to come to mind is that you use less people, not wrong. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, automation ensures more consistent quality, more consistent yield. Output is how many parts you do in an hour. Yield is how many good parts you do in an hour. And of course, at the end of the day, people can go home earlier, have a more balanced life, and the company becomes more profitable. So the way forward will be, of course, automation. But again, we have to look at the thing, because not everything can be automated. High mix, low volume will be a big challenge. But for those products where you have low mix and high volume, by all means, go all out to do that. And I think the government is putting a lot of money. Of course, the next thing is the industry forward, Industry Revolution 4.0, and which our government is putting a lot of emphasis on it too. And this is where we in the industry, whether it's the mid-tier companies or the sectorial association, we're working with the government to help all our members move to the next level of competency.
Thanks, Carlo. On your last point on automation, digitalization, I understand that ASEAN actually is doing something to digitalize certain sectors, priority sectors in the region. So I think this one, and then it's also being tackled in the region. And since we don't really have much time at the moment, I think Annie, for the questions and the Q&A in the chat box, is it possible, to put it in the matrix, that the questions that were asked by our participants and the answers of our speakers, then we also circulate this to the participants who attended this session, so that at least they can revisit whenever they have similar questions. I think that would be really good. And probably ASEAN Secretariat or any one of you, do we have any upcoming events or program to help companies leverage the benefits of RCEP? Maybe we can also promote it during this session. If not, maybe we can just share all these details to them, to the participants, when we share all the presentation slides and even the Q&A. Would that be possible, Annie?
Thank you, Ms. Maes. Yes, we will be sharing the seminar materials from today, possibly by tomorrow, to all the participants and also to the speakers as well. And in addition to that, we would like to encourage participants who are attending today to also check our RCEP official website at the www.rcepsec.org. So you may find out more on future events such as this one. And also we are likely to have another webinar as well on another industry-specific issue by next month, and it will be updated in the RCEP official website. So stay tuned. Thank you, Ms.
Thanks, Annie. And probably you can also share with them the contact person at the ASEAN Secretariat, or the email on which companies can email or contact whenever they have questions about the RCEP. I know each country, each RPC would have their own, and I know it's in the RCEP website, but probably it will also be good to include that when we communicate to the participants for today's session, because not everyone would know where to go whenever they have questions about the RCEP and the benefits, and even if they have questions. Oh, see, so someone is asking, can you repeat the website? So probably it would be good to include that as well in the email when we reach out to the participants, to share with them all the slides and the Q&A and all the details that they need to know. I always say this, you have all these things, but then companies, they don't know who to contact. So it's not just access of information, but also access of the people, the right people, the right agencies, institutions to talk to whenever they have concerns or questions about all these FTA. So it would be good to just communicate, even if it's always like we're always duplicating, but at least they know all these things. So probably I need to conclude the session now. Annie, is it? Okay, yeah. So based on our discussions, starting from the presentations and during the panel discussions, even the Q&A, there are a few recommendations that everyone, the governments, the business support organizations, the businesses can actually do to promote the use of the RCEP, for companies to take advantage of the RCEP, not just for MSMEs, but also for the medium, for large companies, because when we facilitate trade, in a way, we are also helping the small companies that are part of the supply chain, the value chain. So it's very important that we promote all these trade opportunities, trade and investment opportunities under the RCEP. So again, everyone mentioned about this FTA, the RCEP education and outreach. That's very important, but probably we need to have a work plan, different levels, advocacy rate, awareness raising, opportunities, what are RCEP provisions, everything, how to comply or use the provisions of the RCEP. Then you can even go to how to use the FTA, like actual use of the RCEP. So maybe we can come up with that RCEP education and outreach work plan, and just to know as well the technical know-how. As Minshop has mentioned, I also like the idea of this Center of Excellence, which Dan has been mentioning, and that many countries have. Actually, New Zealand, they have it. Maybe we can even look into the possibility of having this Center of Excellence, not just for one country, but for everyone. For RCEP, Center of Excellence, that would be good, I think. Then I also like the idea of coordinating or aligned or coordinated implementation of RCEP. And that's very important. and that's very important. As we mentioned a while ago, one of the problems is not the measures or the initiatives per se, but on how these initiatives are being implemented. So sometimes it defeats the purpose of having all these FTAs, these RCEP, because of the way it's being implemented. So maybe we can also have trainings, for our implementing authorities, just to make sure that everyone are on the same page, as Callum has mentioned. Alignment, coordinated implementation. And I also like the idea of this having consultative mechanism, feedback mechanism wherein companies can go to raise any concerns, questions that they have. So that it can be online, can be, I don't know how we can do that. But I think some of the FTAs, I think the Assist, for instance, has that kind of mechanism platform. It would be good to also have that. And of course, yeah, those are the things that I gathered from, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention last one, the sectoral initiatives. It would be good actually to have the F&B sector included, given that it's an essential sector. So if we can have that, as AFBA has recommended, that would also be good. Yeah, and yeah, that's it from my end. I'll be happy to help you come up with, future activities or work plan or work program to help promote the utilization of the RCEP, especially for the benefit of the MSMEs.
Mace, I have a suggestion. You see, RCEP is all about business. And you mentioned earlier on, at least now we know our face, we see the person, and we have a contact. But since this session is recorded, and this is public knowledge, I'm not sure whether the RCEP Secretariat is going to put all these recorded webinars in a section where people who are not able to attend can log into it later. And it will also be good for contact. After all, it's all about business, that all the speakers and all the panelists contact, whether it's the phone number, the email, be included that with a photo so people know who they're talking to. And let's say if I'm interested to go to Indonesia or Philippines or elsewhere, or Korea, South Korea, and I know who to look for. Or at least that will be the first point of contact. And from there, I move on to the next one. So it will be good for business, future business potential to create this kind of initiatives. I'm not sure. I'm just giving, because every time when I do any webinar, first question I ask myself is, what take-home value can we give our participants? If we cannot answer the question very convincingly, we are wasting our time. Yeah. So if we are able to do that, then people can refer to this later, and then we can also have other contact. Yeah. Whether you think this will be good, and if it's okay, then we can start with this webinar.
Yeah, I agree. That some actually they even do e-learning courses. Like it's for companies, especially the micro and small companies. They don't have time actually to attend this kind of events. So at least if you provide them e-learning courses wherein, and it would be based on their availability even in terms of the pacing, that also would be good. That can be included in your education and outreach work plan. So digitalizing automation, which Callum has mentioned, that will be good as well.
Digitalization, automation, all part of the Industry 4.0. Yeah. And we are driving that very aggressively.
Okay, I think we're good for now. It's almost 5 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. As a secretariat, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Dan, tell your people to come and invest more in Malaysia. Okay. When we go to New Zealand, it's for holidays, and all the good food you have there, the fresh air. Yeah.
Sounds good, mate.
Okay.
I'll see you in Malaysia in September.
Okay.
Thank you,
bye, everyone. Hope you all find this session useful. And maybe put my contact there. I'm okay. These are business opportunities. Yeah.
Cool. Take care, guys.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Ms. Maes. Thank you, everyone. Before we close the webinar, we would like to thank all of the speakers and our moderator for your contribution and time in our webinar today. As now we have a much better understanding on how businesses and particularly SMEs can unlock and take advantage of the RCEP agreement. We also really appreciate all the participants who are staying with us until the very end, despite of the stretch schedule. And the webinar is now closed. And don't forget to check out our RCEP official website at www.rcepsec.org. You can find the link in the chat box. Thank you and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you so much, Miss.